Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the AOT Learning Network webinar series. My name is Betsy Johnson. I'm on the implementation team at the Treatment Advocacy Center. I probably have met most of you by now, but for the new folks, welcome. We're thrilled we've got a great presentation for you this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Brooke, to introduce herself and our speaker. Thank you all.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. My name is Brooke Gentry, and I'm the AOT Implementation Coordinator as part of the implementation team. And today it is my honor to introduce Thurmond Gillis Jr., who is Program Manager with CarePlus New Jersey's First Episode Psychosis Program. Thurmond is a dedicated mental health counselor with over 16 years of experience in the field, and he has a strong passion for guiding individuals of all ages through their mental health journeys. His expertise extends to the intersection of mental health issues and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and he's deeply committed to ensuring that the care provided is culturally aware and inclusive, and recognizes the importance these factors play in mental health treatment and support. So our October webinar is titled A Practical Approach to Inclusivity. I'm going to hand it off to Thurmond, but before I do that, I want to remind you that you can ask questions throughout the presentation using the chat and Q&A functions, and then we will address those questions at the end. And so, Thurmond, take it away.
Thank you, Brooke. First I just want to say thank you, Brooke, thank you, Betsy, and TAC, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this topic today, and thank you to everyone who is here, and I see people are still filtering in. Obviously I'll start now, but as those people come in, they'll catch up. But again, thank you all for having me, and I do hope that you do pull information away from this, and there's things in this presentation that you can start practicing on a daily basis. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. So, no need for me to introduce myself. That was already done. But what I would like to share is that, we have about 60 minutes here today. And the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of time, especially for a topic like this. This is a topic that can literally be talked about for hours upon hours. In fact, I have talked about this topic hours upon hours. When we talk about inclusivity and we talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, these are kind of hot topics today in this day and age. And sometimes they get thrown around, left and right without people not knowing much about them. First, I think we do have to talk about kind of why we are here today, right? Like, we know that there's a lot of racial disparities within our justice system, and also within our healthcare system. A lot of Black and brown folks are disproportionately represented in each of those systems. Often misdiagnosed, overdiagnosed, or underdiagnosed, depending on like the demographics. So due to that fact, we can kind of only conclude that a lot of these individuals are in AOT programs. And that's no fault of AOT, right? Like, there's a lot of different systems in play that cause things like that to happen. So before we get into the main topic of how to start being more inclusive and getting into those practical approaches about it, I did want to kind of define diversity, equity, and inclusion. And forgive me, what I left off is the belonging piece on here, but these are the three key concepts within DEI that we always talk about, right? We talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to me, you cannot separate these three. Let me just say four. Belonging. Let's put belonging in there, even though I failed to put it on this slide. You cannot separate them. In order to have one, you need to have all of them, and they're kind of building blocks upon each other. So I did include the definitions here. Diversity refers to the presence and representation of individuals with a wide range of identities, backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences in a given setting or group. It encompasses various dimensions such as race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, religion, disabilities, socioeconomical status, and more. Equity refers to the fair treatment, access, and opportunity and advancement for all individuals, regardless of their social identities or backgrounds. It involves identifying and addressing systemic barriers, biases, and inequalities to ensure everyone has equal chance to succeed and thrive. Inclusion refers to creating a supportive and welcoming environment that values and respects the diverse perspectives, contributions, and identities of all individuals. It involves actively engaging and involving individuals from different backgrounds and ensuring their voices are heard, valued, and included in the decision-making process. So again, I feel like each of these are important. We are going to focus on the inclusion piece of things today, but I just wanted to make everyone aware that each of these points hold its own value. And some of the things I want you to ponder, while you're looking at these definitions, is when you're sitting around a table in a meeting, how many people at that table look like you? How many people are different than you? The clients that you serve, do they look like you or are they different than you? Do you treat them differently because of that? And if so, why? So those are just some things to think about. I'm going to give you some more to think about in a minute. So it's story time. So get into a comfortable position. Close your eyes, sit back. Well, close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so, or if you're in a place where you can. If you're driving, please do not close your eyes. Keep your eyes open, but keep your mind open as well, so that you can listen to this story. I want you to go on a little bit of a journey with me, right, as I tell this story. So you wake up early in the morning, the soft light of dawn seeping through your window. With a yawn and a stretch, you make your way to the kitchen, eager to brew your morning cup of coffee or tea. But alas, the canister is empty. Not a big deal, you think, deciding to stop at the local coffee shop on your way to work. You step out into the crisp morning air, reaching for your car keys. And as you go to turn the ignition, it refuses to start, leaving you with no choice but to take the bus today. And I know most of you are going to say, well, I can just take an Uber or a Lyft. Well, today you're taking the bus. So while you're walking to the coffee shop, you watch a couple stroll by, hand in hand, sharing tender smiles and playful giggles. Their happiness seems to infuse the air with a touch of magic. Finally, you reach the coffee shop, greeted by a friendly barista who asks, "What can I get for you today?" You place your order, and a few minutes later, you walk out with a nice steaming cup of coffee or tea in your hand. At the bus stop, you find yourself in the company of several other commuters. As you sip your coffee or tea, you decide to make a few phone calls to local mechanics, hoping to resolve your car troubles. The conversations with the mechanics are a mix of frustration and hope. As you hang up with the last mechanic, the bus arrives. The doors open with a hiss. You step onto the bus, greeted by the driver's friendly nod, and you make your way to an open seat, ready to begin your journey to work. So let's all come back to the room, center ourselves, take a nice deep breath. I do have a few questions to ask about this journey that we just kind of all took together. When you saw the couple walking down the street, did you envision a man with a man or a woman with a woman? Was it an interracial couple? Was it an older couple? Was it a young couple? Was one partner old and the other one young? Was the barista at the coffee shop white, black, Hispanic? Were they able-bodied? And when you sat and made those phone calls to the mechanics, did you envision that any of those mechanics were women? And finally, what race was the bus driver? Or for that matter, any of the other passengers on the bus or at the bus stop? So you're probably asking why did we even go through that? Why is he asking me these questions? And there is a reason, because what we're gonna start this topic with is talking about implicit bias. Now, we all hold some type of implicit bias. Um, and what how we really make the change to our implicit bias is noticing those implicit biases that we hold. So the reason I tell that story, the reason I want to tell that story is because I want you to start to envision these things and see what kind of automatically pops up in your brain. And just so you know, none of it is wrong or right. There's no wrong or right answer to any of it. It's just noticing, right? It's just being aware. So implicit bias refers to the attitudes, and stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner, often resulting in unintended or unintentional discrimination or unfair treatment based on characteristics such as race, gender, age, or other social identities. These biases are automatic, pervasive, and can influence our perceptions, judgments, and behaviors without our conscious awareness. So, within this definition, there are two things that always stand out to me. And that's the fact of it being the fact of it happening in an unconscious manner, right? So this implicit bias process happens without our acknowledgement. It literally takes seconds for us to make a determination about something. And a lot of this goes back to our, some people refer to it like as our reptile brain, but basically it's like our simple brain, right? Where we have um just moments to respond, right? So like in moments of fear, or moments that we feel like we're in fear or we feel like we're going to get hurt, we only have seconds to respond to that. So our brain makes these decisions for us based on previous experiences and based on a lot of different things. And the next slide, I'll get more into what that's kind of based on. But again, this happens within seconds, and we are mostly not aware of it when it happens. Really, we're not aware of it when it happens. We're aware of it after the fact usually. Um, and the other part that always sticks out to me as well, and this is kind of a callback to the first part that I mentioned, is just it happens automatically, right? So it's not only unconscious, but it's automatic, right? When something is happening automatically, we do not have time to process that. We do not have time to think it through before we even, respond. And again, I'll probably repeat this several times throughout this presentation, but if you have implicit biases, it does not make you a terrible person. It does not make you wrong all the time. That's not what the goal is here. What the goal is to recognize that we all have them and that we need to work on them. So you may ask, where does it come from? We kind of talked about a little bit about where it came from, but this is more kind of in depth of where these implicit biases come from. So one of the main things is socialization, right? So implicit biases are shaped through the socialization process where individuals learn and internalize societal norms, values, and attitudes. Socialization occurs within families, our educational system, different institutions that we may be involved in, media, and within cultural contexts. Cultural factors is another one here. They play a significant role in the formation of our implicit bias as well. So the cultural messages that we receive, the media representation, and the social narratives often reinforce stereotypes and biases, influencing our own individual perceptions, attitudes toward different groups. And I just want to point out that even if we see something on TV or, we have a different cultural factor that influences us and we don't acknowledge it, it still can have an impact on us. So just be aware of that because our brain is taking in so much information all the time that we don't always consciously process all that information. Media influence, which we spoke about a little bit in cultural factors, also play a huge role. So different TV, film, online platforms, they contribute to this development of our implicit bias. So those media representations perpetuate the stereotypes and portray certain groups in limited or biased ways. So that leads to this kind of internalized messaging from the viewers. Again, it happens internally. We may see something, and the more often we see it, the more it kind of confirms that bias that we may have. Personal experiences also on this list. So the personal experiences and our interactions with individuals from different groups can shape our implicit bias. Positive or negative experiences also shape it. And that's reinforced by those other factors, right? It's reinforced by the socializations, reinforced by the cultural factors that we have here, and it can influence how we perceive and form attitudes toward others. And within our personal experiences, a lot of times we may mean well, right? Like, we may think because I don't know, we have 5 Black friends. We make these generalizations about all Black people, right? And it may feel right. It may feel okay because we feel like we have enough Black friends to make that kind of assumption. So it must be right. And it's not always right. As we know, everyone is individual, right? So what one person experiences is not the same as another person's experience. So moving on to unconscious learning. So implicit biases are often formed through this kind of unconscious learning process. Individuals can develop this bias without our conscious awareness. We spoke about this. I spoke about this within the definition as well. So we make these associations that lead to stereotypes and lead to this kind of automatic thinking process, which is ingrained in us over time. Cognitive processes as well. So the cognitive processes can form these implicit biases. So these are things like categorizations and generalizations, right? Our brains naturally categorize information to make sense of the world that we're in. But it can lead to biases in certain categories are associated with negatives and positive attributes. Just a quick example of how our brain categorizes things. If I see something that has 4 legs and a seat and a back, my brain automatically says, okay, that's a chair, or that's a couch, or that's the association I've made with that. When I see these wooden pieces put together like this with some cushioning, my brain automatically says chair. Confirmation bias, it can contribute just like everything else. Individuals may selectively attend to information that confirms their pre-existing belief or biases, while disregarding or discounting information that challenges those biases. So the interesting thing about confirmation bias in this day and age is that because of the internet and social media platforms, the algorithms that are used kind of tailor and it's like confirmation bias on steroids, right? So the information that we are receiving from our circle, from our inner circle, or from what the algorithms read, it just keeps on confirming these biases that we have. And we realize that, or we feel like it's it's correct, right? And then it's right. It must be right because I'm receiving all this information that's confirming this belief or this feeling that I have. So implicit bias affects on many different levels. So the first level that it affects on is the individual level. So again, we spoke about this already, how it influences our perceptions and judgments, right, our decision-making process, which changes our actions and our behaviors. On an interpersonal level, it changes how we communicate with others. It changes how we have certain conversations, or it changes what conversations that we have with certain people. And it can also lead to microaggression. Excuse me, I'm sorry. It can also lead to microaggressions. And I wish we had more time because microaggressions, we can literally talk about microaggressions for a couple of hours. It's a big topic. And if anyone wants to know more about that, type it in the chat and I can get to it in the end. But again, it also leads to stereotyping and prejudice as well. So on an organizational or institutional level, it can form into workplace biases. It can develop into structural inequality and systemic discrimination. And then that moves up the scale to a grander level, which leads to social inequality, marginalization, and exclusion, and it can affect the social climate. So it doesn't happen. I know this looks like it's in a particular order, but it doesn't always happen in this particular order. Sometimes it's thrown in completely different orders, but it can affect each of these, areas of our life. So now we're gonna shift a little bit. I wanted to go over implicit bias because I feel like we can't talk about inclusion without talking about implicit bias, right? Why do we need to include? Why do we need to practice this diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why do we need to make this a forefront thing in the forefront? And a lot of it is because of these implicit biases that we hold. So cultural competence. And we're going to talk about cultural competence. We're also going to talk about cultural humility. So cultural competence is the ability to effectively understand, appreciate, and interact with individuals from diverse background, cultural background, sorry. Puts it up in my words there. And some of the key components of cultural competence is cultural awareness. So being conscious of one's own cultural values, biases, and assumptions, cultural knowledge. So acquiring knowledge about different cultures, traditions, customs, and communication styles, cultural skills. So developing effective cross-cultural communication, including active listening, empathy, and adaptability. There's a ton of other different cultural skills to learn too. Those are some of the important ones. Cultural attitudes. So cultivating open-mindedness, respect, curiosity, and a willingness to learn from others. So cultural humility. Cultural humility is an approach that recognizes the limitations of one's own knowledge and embraces a lifelong commitment to learning from others. As you can see, in cultural competence, it's the willingness to learn from others, right? And in cultural humility, it's the lifelong commitment to learning from others. Just those little change of phrase makes a huge difference when we're talking about these things. So some of the key principles of cultural humility is self-awareness. And I mean, you can see it already, but I'll just say it. They do share some of the same principles. But cultural awareness, so reflecting on one's own cultural biases, assumptions, and privileges. Respectful communication, so engaging in active listening, seeking to understand and validate others' experiences and perspectives. A non-judgmental attitude, so suspending judgment, avoiding assumptions, and recognizing individual uniqueness. Lifelong learning, which is what I hinted on earlier, so it's committing to an ongoing learning about different cultures, experiences, and perspectives. Now, a key word in this that pops out to me and cultural and I'm sorry, and self-awareness, they talk about privilege, right? And I think that that's key. We have to understand our own privileges. We have to understand those things that we kind of have, the things that we've developed, the things that have developed in us, the things that have been passed down from generations to generations. It's important for us to be aware of those things. And it's not to say it's important for us to feel bad that we're privileged in certain ways, because that's not the case. But it is important for us to recognize those privileges. So, what's the difference, right? And I want to talk about the differences because cultural competence is I'm pretty sure most everyone on this webinar has heard of cultural competence. It's kind of a key phrase, and a lot of companies and businesses like to use cultural competence. And a lot of places, you have to do your yearly cultural competence review and, do some kind of training for it and learn all these things. Uh, but not a lot of people have heard of cultural humility and what that means. So I did want to break down the difference between the two. Cultural competence is needed. Oh, that's one thing I did fail to mention too. I'm not saying that cultural competence is worse than cultural humility. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. They both are necessary and they both are needed. Um, I just believe that cultural humility goes a step further than cultural competence. So cultural competence is needed to navigate cultural differences, reduce disparities, and promote equitable outcomes. Cultural humility is needed to promote respectful dialogue, acknowledging the expertise of others, and creating equitable relationships. Cultural competence implies that learning stops once you have learned all you can learn. And that's a key thing for me when we talk about cultural competence is that it's like, okay, I did this cultural competence course, so that's it. I'm culturally competent. I'm good to go. I don't need to learn anything else. There's nothing else I can learn. Once I'm culturally competent, I can't go past that. Cultural humility, though, recognizes that the learning never stops. It's a journey and it becomes lifelong, right? We become these lifelong learners. Um, and that's the biggest difference between the two. It also stresses the importance of learning from someone of that culture, as well as recognizing that everyone is an individual. So the key thing about learning from someone of that culture is we don't want to get our information from someone who got their information from someone who got their information, right? We want to make sure we get information from the person. And again, we have to be aware, we have to be cognizant of the our minds need to categorize things or to generalize things. So when we're learning about someone's culture, we have to understand that that is that person's culture, meaning that specific person's culture, and it's not the whole culture. It's not representative of the entire culture that that person comes from. Can it be? Yes. Can there be similarities? Can there be things that, other people of that culture practice? Absolutely. But we have to just be cautious of that because we don't want to make those kind of generalizations. So some of the impacts of practicing cultural humility is that it enhances our cross-cultural communication. Whew, it's a lot of C's in that. Cultural humility fosters open and effective communication across different cultures, leading to a better understanding and collaboration. It increases our cultural competence. So learning cultural humility, practicing cultural humility, it supports the development of cultural competence by recognizing the need for ongoing learning, self-reflection, self-awareness, and biases and assumptions. It builds trust and rapport. So cultural humility contributes to building trust and rapport with individuals from diverse backgrounds, creating a safe and inclusive environment for open dialogue and collaboration. Promoting equity and social justice. Cultural humility recognizes power imbalances and helps individuals advocate for equity. It challenges systemic inequalities and contributes to social justice efforts. Now, what's really important to note is that when we are practicing cultural humility, an easy way to think of it is when you're practicing cultural humility, you're open, right? You're open to conversation, you're open to dialogue. You're not taking a defensive position. You're not taking a defensive stance on things. You are learning, right? You're there to learn, and your whole purpose is to understand. So you have conversation that helps you understand. So what does it look like in practice? So these were some of the key concepts of cultural humility, and broken down. This is kind of what it looks like, and we're going to go further into different things that can be done in order to practice this in your daily lives. So self-reflection and awareness within that category, you can engage in regular self-reflection to examine your own cultural biases, assumptions, and privileges, which we spoke about. That helps increase your awareness of how your cultural background influences your perspectives and interactions with others. I cannot stress enough that self-reflection and awareness is key. And I know I say key a lot. So a lot of these things aren't key, but it's key in cultural humility because if we lack the self-awareness and we don't do this self-reflection, um, then it's harder for us to understand another person's position if we don't understand our own position. If we don't understand our own biases and our assumptions and our privileges, then how can we possibly understand how certain things affect another person, right? So that awareness and bringing that awareness to yourself is paramount. Within this next category of active listening and empathy, so we practice active listening and empathy when engaging with individuals from different cultural backgrounds. So we seek to understand their experiences, their perspectives, and values without judgment or assumptions. I'm going to say that last part again, without judgment or assumptions. Just because someone does not do something like us or does not think the way we do does not mean we have the right to pass a judgment on them, right? Um, if there's any judges on the call, that's different. That's a whole different situation. But our assumptions that we have about an individual because of something that they've shared or even because of something that we think, Within practicing cultural humility, we try to understand that those things may not be accurate and that we need to understand that person on an individual and understand their uniqueness. Um, so the next one is lifelong learning. We commit to lifelong learning about different cultures, histories, and social issues. We seek out educational resources, attend cultural events, engage in cross cultural conversations in order to broaden our knowledge and understanding. You know, we attend webinars like this, right? Webinars like this is, if this is your first time hearing about cultural humility, congratulations. You just started your lifelong learning journey. And I am happy to welcome you to it. But when we involve ourselves in more learning and understanding, we grow from that. That's where growth happens. And in the last category here, building cross-cultural relationships. So we actively seek opportunities to build relationships with individuals from diverse backgrounds. We foster genuine connections, engage in meaningful conversations, and embrace the richness of different cultures. Now, I always pose this question to people, and that's when you think about the 10 closest people to you, or let's say five closest people to you, not including your family. So outside of your family, the five closest people to you, do those people look like you? Um, are they the same gender as you? Are they heterosexual, homosexual, like whichever it is, what are they different essentially, right? Are those people different from you? And if those people are not very different from you, then what can you do in order to widen your circle a bit, to get more diverse people in your circle, right? Because we know the more diverse people, the more diversity we have in our circles, the more chances there are to learn, and then more chances there are for a different perspectives and ideas and thoughts about certain things. If we are around people who agree with us all the time, and who agree with everything that we say, and we agree with everything that they say, then what are we learning? So I break it down even further into actual things that you can do on a daily basis, or just things that you can do often. So within self-reflection and awareness, journaling is always important because that can raise our awareness if we're journaling about our thoughts and experiences, and we reflect on different situations where our cultural bias or assumptions may have influenced our actions or perceptions. If you think back now, it's what, 3 o'clock, 3:41 right now. So you've had your whole day, essentially, not whole day, but for those of us who are working today, most of your workday is over at this point. Um, if you can think back now, what were situations or what were things that happened, that your cultural biases may have made certain assumptions and influenced different actions or behaviors of yourself? It's something to think about. Cultural autobiography. So write a cultural autobiography detailing your own cultural background, experiences, and how they have shaped your worldview. This can help you identify your biases and your privilege. You can host different discussion groups or join discussion groups on different forums. There's a ton of different forums out there that people can join. You could even just have it with people around you, whether it's colleagues, friends, whatever it is. Just make sure you're inviting a diverse group of people, to kind of openly talk about cultural bias and privilege and share personal experiences that you've learned from others. The reason why that's important is because these conversations we don't regularly have, and it's because we feel like we don't have to have them. And I say that to the people who hold a lot of privilege, right? I know as a male, I don't have to have conversations about what affects women and how women are affected, and including more women in things that I do and things of that nature, because that doesn't affect me specifically, right? So I have to then find a way to have those conversations, right? If it's important to me, if I feel like it's important to me, I have to find a way to have those conversations because that it does not directly affect me. Um, and so when you have certain privileges, certain things may not affect you. So you feel like you don't have to have those conversations. But I'll tell you, we all need to be having these conversations, right? And we don't need to be having them with people like us. I'm not going to sit around with a bunch of men talking about women's issues because that doesn't make sense, right? If I'm talking about that, I'm talking about that with women. I'm talking about that with the people who it specifically affects. Active listening and empathy. So having a cultural exchange, right? So if you can organize a cultural exchange. Again, this can happen at your job. It can happen anywhere. Sorry. So it can happen in a lot of different places. Again, including people of diverse backgrounds. And it can be sharing meals. It can be telling stories. You could even learn a new language. You can go to cultural festivals. There's a lot of different things you can do to kind of have this cultural exchange. Empathy exercise. So practice empathy exercises where you put yourself in someone else's shoes. Watching documentaries, reading books, or watch a film that highlights the experiences of people from different cultures. I would say watching documentaries and reading books is nowadays, it's not nowadays. I mean, I guess always reading books, but watching documentaries, documentaries are really popular. So they're always a good thing to kind of start you in that process. And there are a lot of good documentaries out there that do highlight different issues and do highlight different cultures. Reflective conversations. So engage in conversations with people of different backgrounds. Make conscious efforts to listen actively, ask open-ended questions, and avoid making assumptions. Lifelong learning. So online courses and workshops, webinars like this one. If you enroll in different online courses and workshops, it can expand your cultural humility practice. It can expand your cultural competence as well. Cultural events, attending different cultural events that may take place, something that you feel like you wouldn't go to, right? That you may not go to. Step outside your box, go to those events, get that kind of hands-on learning experience from the people who are hosting it. Book clubs, host a book club, join a book club. Any literature that focuses any literature from diverse authors that like focus on different cultural experiences and different issues that may be affecting those cultures is always important and key. And the reason why it's good to have a book club is because you're not just reading this information. When you're having a book club, it not only allows you to get this information, but it also allows you to talk about this information. Um, and I would say that the talking about this information is very important. And I always think that I was telling Brooke and Betsy earlier that typically when I give a presentation like this, it's to like, an open kind of a forum where, people are able to talk and share their thoughts and ideas. I really believe that that's where our growth happens and that's where our learning comes from is when we are able to have these conversations. So not only reading a book, but having the conversation about it and making sure that you keep having these conversations. That's where the learning happens. So travel and cultural immersion. I know a lot of us love travel. I know I do. Have not got to travel to very many places in the last few years, thanks to COVID and a toddler. But travel is always important. And the key thing about travel is that when you're going to travel, when you're going into these places, if you're on a resort, try to do something that is not just on the resort, right? Try to do something that actually immerses you in that culture. And you're not getting this kind of like fabricated, watered down version of what that culture looks like to tourists. Um, it can be a very powerful learning experience if we are immersing ourselves in the culture in which we visit. So I know we are almost at time, but I did want to talk about why this is important to AOT programs. And it's important because it builds, well, not builds, I'm sorry, it promotes equality. And I guess it builds it too in mental health care, right? And it builds trust and it enhances engagement and adherence. So when it's promoting the equality and equity in mental health care, Culture Humility helps address the disparities in our mental health in our mental health care system and our access to that mental health care. Individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds, we know, face systemic barriers, discrimination, and disparities. So AOT programs that embrace cultural humility work to eliminate these inequities and ensure that individuals, regardless of their cultural background, their ethnic background, whatever it may be, have equal access to effective treatment. So within building trust, it's trust is a cornerstone of all mental health care in general. Um, if our clients, if our patients do not trust us, then what do we have, right? So many communities, particularly communities, underrepresented communities, don't have the greatest historical relationship with healthcare systems, with the justice system. So a lot of the trauma that has been faced, a lot of historical trauma that has been faced, a lot of discrimination, a lot of the mistreatment within those systems kind of make individuals shy away from treatment or seeking treatment. Um, so by building this trust, we make people aware that we are, you know, equitable, that we are diverse, that we are inclusive. So enhancing engagement and adherence. So individuals are more likely to engage and adhere to treatment and to follow through with treatment plans when they feel like their culture is valued, when they feel like they're being heard, when they feel like they're being understood and respected. Culture humility fosters an environment where clients can feel comfortable discussing their concerns, and that can lead to growth overall for the agency, for the program. The last thing I have here is just a simple book list that I'll go back to in a second. But what I wanted to say that we're at the end here now, and I know we talked about a lot, and I feel like I ran through it really fast, and I do apologize for that. I do wish that we had more time, but this is the time we have, so this is what we use, right? Um, but I will pose one last question for you. And I'm wondering, and you can feel free to type this in the chat along with any of the questions that you may have. I do apologize, I was not able to see the chat, I guess because I'm sharing my screen and I have my slides up. But you can share this in the chat as well. I'm wondering, did you notice anything happening in your body during the presentation? Like, did you feel any tightness in any areas or any release or tension, or any sort of uncomfortability? It's, and I ask that because it's important. We talked about self-awareness, and it's important for us to understand and to recognize the things that are happening, not only in our mind, but also in our bodies. Our body holds a lot of memory that our minds may not necessarily hold on to. Our body kind of holds on to those memories and holds on to that kind of trauma that we may have experienced. So I was just wondering if anyone during this presentation felt anything happen in their body or able to recognize anything that happened within their body. But I'll go back to the book list, and thank you all very much for having me. If you have any questions, Brooke, I believe you're going to let me know, right?
Yes, and thank you so much,
Okay.
Thurmond. This is really great. Right now I am not seeing any questions, but I want to give
Okay.
people okay. We do have one here. So Cassandra is asking, how would you suggest mental health agencies obtain a more diverse workforce?
Cassandra, right? That's who asked that.
Yes.
Thank you, Cassandra, for that question. That's a good question, and it's actually one that my own agency we've been struggling with because or not struggling with, we struggled with it in the past, and now we're finding ways to deal with it. But it's important for us to look at a lot of different things when we're looking at our agencies, and we're trying to understand why we don't have a diverse population of or diverse workforce in our agencies. And one of those things is, where are we recruiting, right? Like, where are the places that we are recruiting from? And the other thing is, what does the language look like in our job post, right? If we're posting jobs, what does that language look like? Is it inclusive language? Is it language that fosters diversity, equity, and inclusion? Um, and another important thing to look at is retention and promotion, right? Like, where are we hiring? Where are we? How are we keeping people in our agency? One, and the second part of that is, those people who are in our agency, are we looking at those people to move them up? And who are the people that are looking to move them up? And who are the people who are looking to move up, right? Because if we're looking at those things, I know in my agency specifically, a lot of our BA level positions, like a lot of our case manager positions, that's where we find like almost all of our diversity, right? Um, and so what are we doing in that population? What are we doing with the people who are BA level clinicians to promote them internally? How are we moving them up, and how are we making our management more diverse? I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, just say, you didn't answer my question. Tell me something different.
Yeah, I thought that was a great answer to the question. So, but we have a couple comments in the chat about books. Rachel was thanking you for bringing the knowledge and encouragement into the space today.
Thank you, Rachel.
And we have another good read suggestion.
Okay.
I'll put another call out there for any other questions. Now's your chance. Oh, it looks like we have
And
something in the Q&A. Sorry. You
I was
go
going to
ahead,
say, in
Thurmond.
the book list that I have is not all in like an exhaustive book list. It's just a few books that came to mind when I was doing this. There's obviously a ton more books out there, but these are the ones that kind of called to me when I was putting together this presentation.
Hey, Thurman, I had a question. This is Betsy. You kind of
Betsy?
skipped over microaggression because you said that was probably worthy of a 2-hour conversation. But I wonder if you could just give a couple of examples, particularly maybe as it relates to AOT that come to
Yeah,
mind.
sure. Yeah, it is. I literally have a 2-hour presentation on microaggressions. Like, I'll pull it up right now. We can go for the next 2 hours. No, but so with microaggressions, I mean, like, some examples of microaggressions can be. I'll give you an example that I myself have heard personally, and often I hear, oh, you speak very well, and in the past, not knowing any better, it always felt strange when someone said that to me, but I couldn't quite understand why it felt strange to me. Um, and and then I was like, huh, what am I supposed to speak like? Like, in their mind, what are they thinking I should speak like? Right? So that's an example of one, a common one. I mean, to this day, I hear that one. One I've heard recently was because I'm tall, right? I'm 6'3", And one I heard recently was, oh yeah, you're 6'3". Oh, your son's gonna be a basketball player, huh? And I was like, I mean, there's a lot of tall people in a lot of tall sports. I don't know why basketball players specifically you thought of, but okay. So microaggressions happen when we make these generalizations and these assumptions about something, um, and not have a lot of context behind it. And microaggressions, for the most part, always mean well. But the really important thing to remember about microaggressions is that it's not about the intent, it's about the impact, right? So if someone intends something to be positive, that does not always mean that the person receiving it is going to receive it in a positive way. So you saying I speak well, yeah, that sounds positive, and for all intents and purposes, it is positive. Do I speak well? Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I'm well learned. Um, but but at the end of the day, when you think about what the what's implied, right, versus what's said, is, you know, where's your slang, right? Where's your, why are you speaking like that? Like you're not speaking like you should be speaking. Like, where do you think I'm from? I guess, you know. So intent versus impact is really important when we talk about microaggressions, and that's the whole thing. I'm gonna stop there because I'll really keep going about
Can I
microaggressions.
just ask a quick follow-up? So if I'm there and I hear somebody say something that, you know, a microaggression to somebody else, and I'm there listening, what would you recommend would be my response to that?
So I'm glad that you asked that. And before I answer that, I want to say one thing. We talk about allies a lot, right? Like, I mean, we didn't talk about it in this presentation, but in general, allyship is talked about a lot. And one thing that I read recently is that we don't need any more allies, we need accomplices, right? Because an ally is saying that I'm watching from the outside and I'm assisting from the outside. An accomplice is saying I am there with you. So when we talk about microaggressions and we talk about addressing microaggressions, we talk about calling in and calling out, right? So if you're calling when you're calling in a microaggression, that's an opportunity for conversation to happen. Like, oh, hey, what did you mean by that? Or hey, when you said that, it kind of felt like you were saying this. So I just wanted some further understanding about it. That's calling in. That's the polite way of addressing a microaggression. Calling out is a little more I don't want to say abrasive. It's the only word that comes to mind right now, but it's a little more like it's putting a stop to what's happening in that moment. So if someone says something, you can say something like, "Oh, ouch!" Like, "Oh, that hurt." Like, why would you say that to me? Like, because we want to put an immediate stop to the damage that it's causing. Microaggressions have been compared to mosquito bites, right? There's actually a great video on YouTube. I love that video about mosquito bites. And basically, like, if you get one mosquito bite, it's annoying, right? And you kind of don't want it there, but it's not going to ruin your entire day unless you're like allergic to it. But if not, it's not going to ruin your entire day, right? But what about the person that receives 100, 200, 300 mosquito bites a day, right? So receiving one microaggression hurts. But if when you're constantly receiving microaggressions time after time after time after time, it's disruptive to your whole well-being. So when someone is witnessing a microaggression, it's really up to that person to what they want to do in that situation. I never really suggest calling out the person who did the microaggression because you kind of have to be sure that if you're coming to the defense of another person, you got to be sure that that person was affected by it, right? If not, then you're not coming to that person's defense. You're speaking from your own point of view, and that's okay too, right? So make sure that you're clear on what it is you're trying to accomplish there, whether it's your own feeling or you're trying to defend a person. Because do not come to another person's defense if they don't need you to come to their defense, right? Come like speak for yourself from your own point of view. Does that answer your question, Betsy?
It absolutely does. That was incredibly helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we have a little more discussion in the chat. I want to highlight this comment because I think it's a good suggestion in line with when you were talking about additional learning, Thurmond. Doug Smith is saying that at his office, they jointly read Subtle Acts of Exclusion, which is a book, I'm assuming, and that it prompted a great discussion with one chapter at each monthly staff meeting. And that he appreciates the presentation today. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think what a great idea to
absolutely. Absolutely. If you can bring that, right, like to your team, and you can have that happen, right? You can have these discussions where, you know, staff meetings come together and, hey, look, the first 10 minutes of the staff meeting, we're discussing this. So we'll get to the business later, but we're going to discuss what we're learning here and how we're kind of expanding and opening up our minds and our bodies for that matter.
And Gwenda is thanking for the resources and examples, and Rachel is saying for the first time she heard the phrase accomplice versus ally, and mentions that that's a really important distinction.
It is. Rachel, listen, I just heard it for the first time not too long ago, and it blew my mind. I was like, ugh, I've been thinking ally this whole time. And then when the definition was explained, when I was able to read, I was like, that's golden. Like, that is so golden.
Definitely.
Can you
and
expound on that just a tad? Because I'm not sure I'm grasping the accomplice. I get the ally, but I think just say a word or two more on that was not sinking in for me.
You know, like we understand what allyship is, right? Allyship, we understand what it is. What when you compare it to being an accomplice, right? Like, accomplice has such a negative term, like a negative connotation to it, because we think accomplice and we think like crime, um, especially all our legal people in here. You know, we may automatically jump to like something being negative, but accomplice just means that a person is doing something with you, right? They're sharing in whatever it is that is happening. So to be an ally is essentially you're helping. Not that allyship is bad, right? You are helping, but you're helping from the outside, right? When you have an accomplice, it is someone who is in the dirt with you. Like, you're going through this, we're going through this.
Got it. Thank you.
And Doug, by the way, the who shared the thing about the book in the staff meeting, said that subtle acts of exclusion are the new word for microaggression, by the way, which I was not aware of. So that's helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug. We do have two other questions for you, Thurmond, in the Q&A. One is anonymous, and the question is, as a mental health provider, how do you recommend we keep our cultural competence and humility in check?
Good question. I just want to say first, Ruth made a really good point in the comments and said allyship is passive and accomplice is active. Yes, absolutely. How do we keep our are you I'm a little confused by the question. Are you asking how we how we develop it, or are you asking like how we keep our like biases in check?
I will give them a chance to submit another question and follow up.
Was that in the Q&A? Maybe I need to.
Yeah, it was in the Q&A. But in the meantime, we do have another question we could address from Leslie. She's asking, as a white middle-aged woman, I want to be careful and not offensive when sharing education about how folks with SMI are more at risk for dying if 911 is called. But a Black person with SMI is even more at risk. I feel like this messaging is important to bring attention to this problem, but she wants to do it well and is asking for advice.
Yeah, it's you can't really deny like facts, right? And we can't deny like, I mean, people can try to deny statistics, but when statistics are taken in many different places by many different kinds of people, we kind of can't deny those, right? So when we're addressing these things with people and we're you know telling people these things, the facts are the facts, right? I tend to be not a person that kind of like skirts around a subject. Um, when I talk about something, especially something like this, I come right out and say it. I do understand how, people would want to be more, or people are more hesitant or a little more careful when they're speaking on this subject. But I would say the only advice that I can give is that you have your facts in order, right? Because when people challenge you, you have your facts to back you up. I hope that that's helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, that was our last question. And we haven't gotten any follow-up on that other question. So
Can you reread that question? Maybe I didn't
yes.
understand.
Yes, definitely. So the question is, as a mental health provider, how do you recommend we keep our cultural competence and humility in check?
I'm going to answer it like I think. Um, and what I think is asking is how do we make sure we're following through with these things? And I think a lot of it is just the accountability, right? And knowing that, like, hoping that you have a community around you or even one other person that can hold you accountable for these things. Um, and that you follow that one of those lessons in there, which is the lifelong learning, right? That you're always doing something to learn more. And I'm not saying you have to do something every second of the day or every single day, but it is important to make sure that we are always learning these things. And it's important that we're sharing it with the people around us, right? We cannot change the entire world in a blink of an eye. It's not possible. But what we can change is ourselves, right? And the change that we have on ourselves when we start recognizing things and we start becoming more aware of things, that can impact other people. And I'm not saying we can change other people because we know we can't, but it can impact other people. It can have some sort of impact that may lead to a change. So I think the more that we're working on ourselves, and the more that we are aware of what's happening with ourselves, the more we kind of keep um, cultural humility and cultural competence where it should be, which is growing, always growing.
Definitely. Well, I'll do one final call for questions, everybody. If you have them, submit them.
Last call for questions. I'm here. This is my favorite part. My favorite part of questions. I wish we can put you all on screen and you can just ask away.
All right. Oh, okay. So we have another question, which is how, and this is from an anonymous attendee, and the question is, how do you recommend people working in multicultural settings manage difficult feelings in both directions?
Okay. Hmm. Um, are you saying difficult feelings, whereas like, one culture feels really strongly about something, the other culture feels opposite? Or are you speaking from yourself having?
I will give them a chance to follow up because I'm not sure I understand the question either. But in the meantime, Kate is asking, should we aim to change people or work towards understanding people without judgment and assumptions?
We should never work toward changing people. It is a losing battle. Um, People can only change themselves. We can only change ourselves. Um, we should work toward understanding without judgment or assumption, but with a caveat that that does not mean all things are acceptable to us, right? Like just because we're trying to understand without judgment or assumption doesn't mean that everything is acceptable for us personally, right? But we do need to understand people where they are. So we should never try to change anyone. Would it be nice for people to change when we tell them to? Or be like, listen, you need to do things differently because I know what I'm talking about. Yes, that would be nice, but that's just not how it works. So trying to change people, that is a fight that you will continue to have forever. So I always suggest change yourself. Change yourself because it's the one thing that you can do.
Definitely. Well, we don't have follow-up on this other question, so give them a couple more seconds. Oh, okay. They're referring to instances of mutual friction on racial issues.
Okay, I think I understand. I'll answer it this way and hope this person just tells me if this answers it or not. But like I had said earlier during the presentation, I do think that communication and conversations is where we grow and where we learn a lot of this at. So I do think by holding these conversations, holding space for these conversations, is where a lot of this friction can kind of get dispelled a bit. Uh, I know for my agency, one of the first things that we did is we had we had what we called a support group that we held weekly for staff, and all different every staff could join the support group. Initially, the support group were for people of color who, after the murder of George Floyd, kind of felt like it was hard to keep their personal feelings and their work life separate. So we opened up a space where you can come and talk about those hard feelings that you were having, and and we promote it as a brave space and not like a safe space. Because in brave spaces you learn, in safe spaces you just feel okay. Both are important, but in brave spaces is where you can have those difficult conversations where you can be really uncomfortable. Uncomfortability is like the key of growing and learning. So opening up a space where people can have those conversations and not just walk around with this tension all the time is really beneficial.
Definitely, that makes sense. All right. Well, I think that just about does it. Um, Thank you so much, Thurmond, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for attending.
Yes,
I will,
thank you to everyone who showed up today.
yeah,
And thank you for having me.
of course. And everyone, I will send out the recording. And Thurmond, if it's all right with you, the slides, I know people want the book lists especially. So I will send those out. And thanks again, everyone. And see you next month, hopefully.
Thank you, Thurman.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.